Welcome to Today I Will Take You on a Journey into My Own World. The Wolves of Mirror Lake. The ranger counted 7 wolves sleeping by the lake. By morning, there were 8. No wolf had entered the forest. No wolf had left. The cameras confirmed it. Dr. Nora Vasic had been studying the Mirror Lake wolf pack for 6 years. She knew every scar, every gait, every behavioral quirk of all 7 members. So when she reviewed the motion camera footage on the morning of October 14th and counted 8 wolves sleeping at the water's edge, she did not reach for an explanation. She reached for her field notebook and wrote the date and the number, and then sat very still for a long time. The footage was unambiguous. She had reviewed it 4 times before she called anyone. The camera array around Mirror Lake consisted of 11 units positioned at overlapping angles, triggered by motion, with continuous low-resolution recording as backup. The cameras had been installed by her team 3 years ago and had never, in 3 years, produced footage she could not account for. The previous night's recording began at dusk. At 7:43 p.m., all 7 members of the pack arrived at the lake's southern shore in the sequence she expected. The alpha female first, whom she called Arden, silver gray and deliberate, then the alpha male, larger and darker, whom she called Call. Then the 5 subordinates, in their usual order of rank. She knew them by body proportion, by the shape of their ears, by the way each one moved. She had been watching them for 6 years. She would know them in silhouette from 100 meters. At 8:17 p.m., the pack settled. They arranged themselves in the way they always arranged themselves for overnight rest at the lake, bodies overlapping slightly, heads toward the water, forming the rough semicircle that Nora had documented so many times she could sketch it from memory. 7 wolves. The moon was full and bright, the lake perfectly still, the image almost painterly in its clarity. At 8:17 p.m., the pack was 7. At 6:04 a.m., Nora's motion alarm triggered. The first camera to activate was camera 3, positioned at the lake's eastern edge. The image showed the pack beginning to stir. Arden lifting her head, Call shifting his weight, the subordinates waking in their usual sequence. Nora had watched this footage type 100 times. She always watched it quickly, scanning for anomalies before settling in for the careful review. She stopped the playback immediately. There were 8. Not 7 with one she had miscounted. 8 distinct animals, each one legible as a separate body with separate breath. She could see the breath, the cold morning air making it visible. Each animal producing its own small cloud. She counted again. She counted with the footage paused. She counted the ears visible above the mass of sleeping bodies. She counted the tails. She checked camera 3 against camera 7 against camera 11. Every angle gave her the same number. 8 wolves. One more than there had been at 8:17 the 19th previous night. She reviewed the overnight footage at 16 times speed first, looking for the moment of arrival. Nothing. She reviewed it at 4 times speed. Nothing. She reviewed the 3-hour window between midnight and 3 a.m. at normal speed, watching every frame. The pack slept. The moon moved across the water. The mist came in off the lake at around 2 a.m., thick enough to reduce visibility on several cameras to near zero for approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes of mist. She called her research partner Demi, who arrived at the monitoring station in 22 minutes and reviewed the footage independently, without Nora telling her what to look for. Demi counted. Demi checked all 11 cameras. Demi sat back in her chair and said, 8. Nora said, I know. Demi said, it came in during the mist window. Nora said, that's the only possibility, but no camera shows approach. Nothing on the perimeter sensors, nothing on the audio. And look at how it's positioned. The 8th wolf was sleeping in the center of the group. Not at the edge, at the center, folded into the pack with the ease of an animal that had slept in exactly that position many times before. Its body language was indistinguishable from the others. Arden's nose was touching its flank. Call's foreleg was draped over its back. Demi said slowly, they're not reacting to it. Nora said, no. An unknown wolf entering a pack's rest site would produce, at minimum, defensive alerting from the dominant animals. Almost certainly conflict. The scenario in which an unfamiliar wolf walked into a sleeping pack and was immediately and completely integrated, body contact, mutual warmth sharing, the alpha female's nose resting trustingly against its side, was not a scenario Nora had any framework for. It was not a scenario that existed in the literature she was aware of. They went to the lake. The pack was awake by the time they arrived, doing the morning things packs do. Arden and Call moving along the water's edge. In what Nora had always read as a form of territorial affirmation, the subordinates in loose groupings, someone, she thought it was the youngest, a male she called Pip, splashing in the shallows with the specific joy of an animal in good health on a good morning. She counted 7. She stood at the tree line with her binoculars, and she counted 7 wolves doing ordinary morning things at Mirror Lake. And she lowered the binoculars and looked at Demi, and Demi looked back at her with the same expression she suspected was on her own face, which was the expression of someone who has just encountered the edge of what they can explain and is standing at it, looking down. They reviewed the morning footage carefully. The mist had cleared at approximately 2:43 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., when the cameras regained full clarity, the pack numbered 8. At 6:04 a.m., when Arden lifted her head, there were 8. In the 17 minutes between 6:04 and 6:21, the pack dispersed from its sleeping position along the shore. At 6:21, there were 7. Nora reviewed the 17-minute window at frame-by-frame speed. She watched every wolf. She tracked each one by the identifying marks she knew better than her own handwriting. At some point in those 17 minutes, one wolf, the one she could not identify, the 8th, was there, and then it was not. She could not find the frame in which it disappeared. It was present, and then, some number of frames later, it was not, and she could not locate the transition. She filed the incident report with meticulous care, attaching the full footage archive and her frame-by-frame analysis. She sent it to the 3 colleagues she trusted most. She received 3 responses in 3 days, all of which said variations of the same thing. Extraordinary footage, no explanation, please send the originals for independent analysis. The originals were analyzed by camera engineers, by wildlife biologists, by a forensic video specialist who examined the footage for evidence of tampering and found none. The footage was genuine. The footage showed 8 wolves. The footage showed the transition from 7 to 8, and from 8 to 7, without a discernible mechanism for either change. Nora continued her research at Mirror Lake. She continued for 4 more years. until a funding change ended the project, and the monitoring station was decommissioned. In those 4 years, she documented the pack with the same rigor she had always brought to it. Births, deaths, territory shifts, behavioral patterns across seasons and years. On 3 more occasions, the cameras recorded 8 wolves at the lake's edge in the night hours. Each time, by morning, there were 7. Each time, the additional animal appeared during a window of reduced camera visibility. Weather, mist, a brief technical fault on one occasion, and disappeared without a legible transition. She never identified the 8th wolf. She examined every photograph, every database of known wolves in the region, every record of dispersing individuals from other packs. No match. The animal was not in any record she could access. It was simply a wolf that existed in the footage and then did not. Arden died in the 4th year, of old age, in the manner of alpha females, in the center of the pack, warmly surrounded. Nora was there for it, at a respectful distance, documenting. She watched Call and the others arrange themselves around Arden's body with the specific gravity of creatures who understand, in their own way, that something irreplaceable has passed. In the footage from that night, there were 8 wolves around Arden's body. By morning, 7. Nora wrote in her field notebook, "I do not have an explanation. I have documentation. Perhaps documentation is enough. The record that something happened, even if the how and why remain beyond current reach. The pack knows something I don't. They have always seemed entirely unbothered by the 8th presence. Maybe the mystery is mine, not theirs. Maybe they understand it completely, and the understanding exists in a register I simply can't access." She closed the notebook. She looked at the lake where 7 wolves were doing their ordinary morning things in the early light. She counted them again, just to be sure. 7. She had learned in 6 years of watching them to find this number both completely right and now permanently weighted with the ghost of another. The man who came back wrong. Her husband returned from the wilderness after 11 days missing, healthy, calm, and unable to explain where he had been. That was the first thing wrong. It was not the last. The moment Sable Vren saw her husband walking up the driveway at 6 a.m. on a Thursday, she felt 2 things simultaneously. Relief so total it made her knees uncertain, and a terror she could not name, coming from somewhere beneath reason, from the part of the brain that is older than language, and sometimes knows things the rest of the mind has not yet caught up to. He looked fine. That was the first specific thing she noticed. Not that he was alive, not that he was moving, but that he looked fine. 11 days in the wilderness, 11 days of search teams and rescue helicopters, and 112 hours of the particular hell that is not knowing, and Daniel Vren walked up the driveway in the pale morning with the unhurried ease of a man returning from a walk he had chosen to take. He was not thin. He was not sunburned or frostbitten or dehydrated in any visible way. His clothing was dirty, but not torn, not the clothing of someone who had fought through 11 days of survival. He was not limping. He was not squinting against the light. He walked with his usual gait, with the particular quality of movement she knew so well she could identify it from a distance, and she had. which was why she had come out of the house before he reached the door. She went to him and held him, and he held her back, and he smelled like himself, which was somehow the most unsettling thing. Not like outdoors or sweat or 11 days without a shower, but like himself, like the soap he used and the particular warmth of his skin. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I lost track." She said, "Where were you?" He said, "I'll explain. Let me come inside." He never explained. This was not a refusal, not a deliberate withholding, not the behavior of someone hiding something, or at least not a hiding she could name. When she asked him directly, which she did, many times and in many ways over the following days, he would begin to answer and then stop. Not evasively, but blankly. The way a person stops when they have reached the edge of what they can access. He would say, "I was in the forest. I was following the trail, and then I wasn't. And then he would pause, and the pause would go on, and his eyes would have the quality of someone looking at something just outside peripheral vision. He had no injuries. The medical team that examined him found nothing. No signs of exposure, no nutritional deficits, no evidence of the physical stress that 11 days without resupply in that terrain should have produced. The doctor said privately to Sable, "He's in better shape than most people who've spent 11 days in civilization. I don't know what to make of it." The police interviewed him. He answered their questions with the cooperative patience of someone who genuinely wanted to be helpful and genuinely could not provide what they needed. He did not know where he had been. He did not know what he had eaten. He did not know how he had stayed warm. He did not know where the 11 days had gone. At home, she watched him. She was not a suspicious person, or had not been before. She had been a person who trusted her husband because he was trustworthy, who had not previously found reason to examine his behavior with the fine attention she was now applying. She applied it now because she had no other tool available, because something in the pre-language part of her brain was still running its alarm, and she had no way to shut it off except to look very carefully at everything and determine whether the alarm had a source. He ate normally, he slept, and this was the first specific anomaly she documented to herself, exactly 8 hours every night, which was not like Daniel, who had always been a variable sleeper, sometimes 6 hours, sometimes 9, restless, occasionally reading at 3 a.m. with his lamp on the lowest setting. Now he lay down at 10:30 and was asleep within minutes, and woke at 6:30 and was alert immediately, with no transition period, as though consciousness were a switch rather than a gradient. He was kind. He was present. He asked about her work, remembered things she had told him weeks ago, brought her coffee in the morning at the temperature she liked. He was, by any reasonable measure, a good husband being a good husband. She found this, inexplicably, among the most unsettling things. He had been a good husband before. He had also been irritable on difficult workdays, forgetful about small things, occasionally absorbed in his own thoughts to the exclusion of everything around him. He had been human, in all the textured, imperfect ways of human. Now he was consistent. Now he was, she thought, carefully, performing consistently, with a consistency that was not quite the consistency of a person, but the consistency of someone running a very good model of a person. She told this to no one. It sounded, even to her, like the processing of trauma, like the irrational suspicion of someone whose husband had frightened her badly and who was still frightened. Therapists had names for what she was experiencing. She made an appointment. The therapist was a kind woman named Dr. Osei, who listened carefully and said the right things, which were trauma produces hypervigilance. Hypervigilance produces pattern matching in ambiguous stimuli. This is a normal response to an abnormal event. Sable nodded and agreed, and went home and continued watching her husband. 3 weeks after his return, she found the journal. It was not hidden. That was important. It was sitting on the nightstand on his side of the bed, a small notebook she recognized as one of the blank ones from the drawer in his office. She picked it up because it was there and open, which was an invitation. Or she told herself it was. She read it. The first several pages were normal. Notes on work projects, a grocery list, a sketch of something she couldn't identify, thoughts about a book he was reading. Then, a page that was different. The handwriting was his, but tighter, more deliberate, and the content was a list. The list read, "Morning, coffee, 2 sugars." She takes it this way. Ask about the Henderson project. She mentioned it last week, worried about the timeline. Remember, she prefers the window open at night. The dog's name is Ferris. He responds to Fairy also. Favorite color? Dark green. Mother's name? Claire. Complicated relationship. Don't ask directly. She stood at the nightstand and read the page, and then turned to the next page, which continued in the same vein. More facts, more preferences, more behavioral notes about herself, about their house, about the routines of their shared life, written with the careful specificity of someone studying for an exam on a subject they had not lived. She put the journal down exactly as she had found it. She went downstairs. She made tea she did not drink. She sat at the kitchen table until she heard him in the shower above her. And then she sat for the length of the shower. And then she heard him on the stairs, and she turned to look at the door. He came in. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Something small, something she might not have noticed 3 weeks ago. And he said, "You found it!" She said, "Yes." He sat down across from her. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up, and the eyes were Daniel's eyes, the exact pale gray she had known for 12 years. And they held something in them she had never seen in them before. Not guilt, not deception, but something more like effort. The effort of trying to translate something very large into something a language she spoke could contain. He said, "I don't know how to explain what happened to me. I've been trying to write it down, and I can't. The 11 days, I was somewhere, not lost, somewhere. And when I came back, I had the shape of things. I had the outline, but the texture, the lived texture, I had to rebuild it. The journal is how I've been rebuilding it." She said, "Daniel." He said, "I know how that sounds." She said, "Are you Daniel?" A long silence, the kind that has weight. Outside, Ferris was barking at something in the yard, the joyful bark, not the alarm bark. Something interesting rather than something threatening. He said, "I am trying very hard to be. Whatever I was in those 11 days, wherever I was, I came back to this, to you, to this house, to Ferris, to the Henderson project, and dark green, and your mother's name, and everything I'm supposed to know because I've lived it. I came back because this is where I want to be. That is the truest thing I can tell you." She looked at him for a very long time. She said, "The journal. Was it because you forgot? Or because you never—" He said, "Both. Neither. I'm not sure those are different things anymore." What she did with this information is a question she has never been able to answer with complete honesty, even to herself. She stayed. She stayed because she loved him, whatever he was. Whatever had happened on the mountain in those 11 days, she loved the thing sitting across from her at the kitchen table that was trying so hard to be Daniel, that had come back to her, that was rebuilding from notes and memory and effort the texture of a life it wanted to inhabit. He threw the journal away. He did not need it anymore, he said, and she believed him, not because she had resolved the question of what had happened, but because she had decided that the question, while it would not leave her, did not need to be answered for her to continue. Some mysteries are load-bearing. Remove them, and the structure of everything built around them collapses. She was not willing to do that. She watches him sometimes, not with suspicion anymore, or not only with suspicion, but with a specific quality of attention that she did not have before, and that she cannot imagine being without now. She watches him laugh at something on television with the laugh she knows, and she watches him be impatient in traffic with the exact impatience she recognizes, and she watches him sleep his 8 hours with the switch-like precision that has never changed. And sometimes, not often, she catches him, watching her with the same quality of attention, careful, specific, the attention of someone memorizing something important, someone who knows the value of the thing they are looking at because they understand, better than most, how completely and suddenly it can be gone. She has never asked again. He has never explained. Between them there is this, a life continuing, warm and real, and built on a foundation that has a room in it she is not allowed into, and that she has decided, for reasons she can defend to herself, to leave closed. It is enough. Most days it is entirely enough. Some nights she lies awake and listens to him breathe his precise 8 hours, and she thinks, "Whatever you are, you came back. You came back to me, and you are trying." And maybe trying, with that quality of effort and that quality of attention, is the most human thing there is. She falls asleep. In the morning, he brings her coffee at the temperature she likes. She does not look at the nightstand. The frequency. Every 7 years, 17 people in 17 different countries wake at exactly 3:33 a.m., go to a window, and look north. They have never met. They share no language, no culture, no connection, except this: they all draw the same thing afterward. The woman who figured it out was not a scientist. She was a librarian in a small city in Portugal, and she figured it out the way most important things are figured out: by accident, by paying attention, and by being the kind of person who, when she notices something strange, does not immediately look for reasons to unnotice it. Her name was Caterina Mello. She was 53 years old. She had worked at the Biblioteca Municipal for 26 years, and she had, in that time, developed the particular skill of librarians who have seen everything. She noticed patterns in what people looked for. The pattern she noticed in the autumn of 2019 was this. In the space of 3 weeks, 4 different people, strangers to each other, different ages, different backgrounds, no apparent connection, came to the library looking for books on the same subject. Not the same book, the same subject. Approached from different angles. One wanted geography, one wanted history, one wanted astronomy. One, the most interesting, a retired engineer who seemed embarrassed to be asking, wanted everything available on the subject of recurring dreams. The subject was the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis. This was not in itself remarkable. The aurora was a popular subject, visually spectacular, the kind of thing people became interested in for many reasons. What made Katerina pause was the secondary element. All 4 patrons had mentioned in the course of their conversations with her that they had recently had a dream, a specific dream. A dream of looking north and seeing something in the sky. She had heard 2 such mentions and registered it as coincidence. 3 mentions she had filed under interesting. The 4th mention, from the retired engineer who had driven 40 minutes to this specific library because, and this was what he said with the embarrassment, he didn't want to ask at his local library, where people knew him, broke the threshold. She said to the engineer, "Can you describe what you saw in the dream?" He described it. He described a pattern in the sky, not the aurora itself, or not exactly, but something that reminded him of it, a configuration of light. He drew it on the back of a receipt he had in his pocket, with the slightly apologetic manner of someone who suspects they are about to be thought strange. Katerina looked at the drawing. Then she said, "Wait here, please." She went to her office, to the notebook where she recorded observations about patrons and their requests. A professional habit, not an intrusive one, just the notes of someone who found patterns useful. She found the note she had made about the 3rd patron, who had also drawn something. She had drawn it because Katerina had asked, on the same instinct, and had kept the original. She brought it back to the engineer. They were the same drawing. Not similar, not approximately matching. The same configuration of lines and curves, the same proportions, rendered by 2 different people who had never met, one of whom was a retired engineer, and one of whom was a 19-year-old student from a different part of the city. The engineer said, "Oh." Katerina said, "Yes." She spent the next 3 months doing what librarians do when confronted with something they don't understand. She researched it. She was methodical. She started with what she knew: 4 patrons, 4 dreams, 2 identical drawings, and she expanded outward from there. She searched news archives, academic journals, online forums, everything she could access. She was looking for other instances of this specific dream, this specific image. She found 47 documented instances spanning 63 years, scattered across 22 countries, describing with varying degrees of specificity the same experience. Waking at the same time, the reports consistently said 3:33 a.m. in every time zone. Going to a window, looking north, seeing something in the sky that was like the aurora, but more structured, more deliberate, a pattern rather than a phenomenon, and drawing the same thing afterward. The oldest instance she found was a letter written in 1956 by a schoolteacher in Iceland, describing a dream and enclosing a sketch of what she had seen. The letter had been sent to a scientific journal that had published a brief notice of it in a letters column and moved on. The sketch, reproduced in the journal, matched. The most recent documented instance before her 4 patrons was from 2012, 7 years earlier. Before that, 2005. Before that, 1998. Every 7 years. She built a timeline. She identified the apparent cycle with the care of someone who suspects a pattern and knows that. Suspected patterns are unreliable until tested. The cycle held. Every 7 years, across a span of 63 years, she could document, and presumably further back before the record began, people waking at 3:33 a.m., going to windows, looking north, seeing something, drawing the same thing. Not the same people, different people every time as far as she could determine, distributed across the globe without apparent geographic logic. 17 seemed to be the approximate number per cycle, though the documentation was incomplete and she could not be certain. She had no explanation. She was a librarian, not a scientist, not a neurologist, not an astronomer. She had the documentation and the timeline and the drawing, which she had now reproduced carefully in her notebook many times, and which was a configuration she could not find a match for in any visual database she had access to. Not a constellation, not a known atmospheric phenomenon, not anything she could name. She did something that she later described as the best and most frightening decision of her life. She posted about it. Not on a major platform, not with any expectation of reach. She posted in a small online forum dedicated to unexplained experiences, with photographs of the drawings and a summary of her research under her real name, because she had decided that if she was going to do this at all, she was going to do it honestly. The response came in 3 waves. The first wave was the predictable noise, the credulous, the conspiratorial, the people who had an explanation that required her to believe many other things first. She read everything and responded to almost nothing. The second wave arrived about a week later and was different. Careful, specific, private messages from people who said they had had the dream and had never told anyone, and had been, in some cases, carrying the weight of it alone for years. They sent her their drawings. 12 drawings from 12 strangers in 8 countries, all the same. The third wave was a single email from an address she did not recognize, with no identifying information in the message. The email said, "You have found what several of us have been trying to document for many years. You have found it faster and more thoroughly than anyone before you. We would like to speak with you. Are you willing?" She was a librarian. She was 53 years old. She had spent 26 years in a building dedicated to the proposition that information should be available to people who need it, and she had developed in that time a certain fearlessness about following a question to its source. She wrote back, "Yes." What she found at the end of that particular thread was not what she had expected. Not a conspiracy, not a secret organization, not anything with a dramatic structure. It was 7 people in 7 different countries who had each independently arrived at a version of what she had assembled, and who had found each other over the preceding decade, and had been quietly comparing notes. A physicist in South Korea, a meteorologist in Canada, a retired signals intelligence analyst in Germany who would not specify exactly what she had done professionally, but who had access to radio frequency data that the others did not. An anthropologist in Brazil who had found references to the recurring dream in pre-Columbian oral traditions, suggesting the cycle extended considerably further back than Katarina's documented 63 years. They did not have an explanation. This was the first thing the physicist said When they had their first video call, all 8 of them, Katerina newly added to the group. We do not have an explanation. We want to be clear about that. We have evidence. We have the timeline. We have the distribution data. We have the drawing. And we have something else. He shared his screen, a waveform, audio. He said, "The signals analyst found this. It requires specialized equipment to detect, and there is no public record of it, but it exists. A transmission, or something that behaves like a transmission, originating from a direction consistent with magnetic north, occurring on the same 7-year cycle. We cannot determine the source. We cannot decode the content. But the timing corresponds exactly to the documented dream events." The waveform on his screen looked like the drawing. Katerina looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "Someone is sending something." The physicist said, "Or something is. We don't know what. We don't know why 17 people in 17 countries receive it, while the rest of the world doesn't notice. We don't know if receiving it is a function of the person, or of their location, or of something else entirely. We don't know what the transmission contains, or what the response to it is supposed to be." Katerina said, "The next cycle is 2026. He said, "Yes." She said, 7 years from now." He said, "We'll be watching. We have better equipment now. We have more people." The signals analyst believes that if the transmission occurs on schedule, she may be able to get a more complete capture this time, enough to attempt a decode. They ended the call. Katerina sat in her kitchen in Porto, in the dark, because she had not turned the lights on when evening came and had not noticed. Outside, the city went about its business. Somewhere north of everything, something had been sending the same signal every 7 years for longer than any of them could document. And 17 people every cycle were receiving it in their sleep, and standing at their windows in the dark and looking north. She thought about the 4 patrons who had come to her library. She thought about the retired engineer and his embarrassed drawing on the back of a receipt. She thought about the school teacher in Iceland in 1956 who had written a letter to a journal that had published a brief notice and moved on. All of them looking north. All of them drawing the same thing. All of them, in their different ways, trying to figure out what they had received. She went to the window. It was overcast. She could not see the stars, could not see any lights in the sky. She looked north anyway, in the direction of north, the way the people in her timeline had looked north. Not expectantly, just oriented, just turned toward the thing she was thinking about. She thought, 2026, 7 more years. She thought, I will be 60. I will be here in this city, watching. She thought, whatever you are, we are paying attention now. We have always been paying attention. We just didn't know we were looking for the same thing. She stayed at the window until the clouds shifted and one star appeared and then was covered again. It was enough. She had learned in 53 years and 26 years of librarianship and 3 months of following an impossible pattern to its current edge that sometimes a glimpse is sufficient. Sometimes you see the shape of something in the dark and the seeing is its own answer, even if the thing itself remains beyond reach. She went to her desk. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. She wrote the date. She wrote 2026. 7 years. We will be ready. She underlined it. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of her apartment, with the city outside and the overcast sky above it, and something north of that, repeating its old signal into the dark. She was not afraid. She was, she realized, the opposite of afraid. She was a librarian. Someone was sending a message. She intended to read it.